Well, good morning and welcome everyone. Welcome to our 2019 Archives and Records Management Seminar. I'm really excited to have you all here. My name is Tyler Stump and I am an archivist at the State Archives. You may have seen my name in some of the publicity we've been putting out for this. I guess I'm just going to get right into it because we have a lot of amazing speakers today and we only have one day to listen to them, so I want to give you as much time to listen to them as possible. But I have a few housekeeping things first. If for the people who are here in person in Harrisburg, if you need bathrooms, they're right outside the doors you came in. We also, if there's a fire, God forbid, you would also go out that door. For our folks who are listening in online, if you have any audio questions, the number to call is 717-787-4121. Also, if you have questions, either for our speakers, because we'll have question and answer sessions at the end of each of our presentations, or if you have any audiovisual technical questions, you can email them also to my email, which is tystump@pa.gov. So either of those will be fine. I just wanted to thank real quick the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission for funding and supporting and putting on this seminar. Also, I'd like to thank the National Historical, NHPRC, National Historical Publications and Records Commission for their support. We really couldn't have done any of this without their support. If you saw the schedule, we've got 3 sessions today, 2 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. So we'll have a short break in between the 2 in the morning, then we'll have a longer lunch break, and then we'll kick back here at 1:30 for the final session. I've also been asked to tell you all, if you're here in person, there's a lot of food trucks apparently in the Capitol today. So if you're around for lunch and you go out behind the Capitol building, there should be some really good food. And everyone online, then you'll just have to come next year for the good food. One last quick thing I wanted to mention, this is being recorded for everyone here in person, so if you are uncomfortable with that, there are seats in the back where you won't be in view of the cameras, but just keep that in mind. Then also if you have cell phones or anything, make sure they're on silent so that doesn't get in the way of anything. So anyways, so let me just kick off our first session then. Our first one is going to be on moving an archive or an office. Whether you're in archives or an office building and you're a record manager, there comes a time for most of us when we have to move to a new space or we're renovating an office and we have to move our records. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's a permanent move, but it's going to happen to everybody, at least at some point in our careers. Actually, at the State Archives, we're preparing to build our new building, and we're going to be moving all 250 million of our documents to a new building in a few years, so we're also a little nervous about that. Moving archives and records is obviously a big challenge and can be really daunting, but with good planning and good strategy, this can be done pretty easy, pretty painlessly. So I'd like to introduce 3 speakers today who have been there and they've done that, and they're going to share kind of their wisdom and knowledge about how that experience went for them. First, we're going to hear from John Paul Deley, who's the Vice President of the Senator John Heinz History Center and the Director of the Dieter Library and Archives. He has 42 years of public history experience at a list of institutions just about as long as my arm is. He also serves on Pennsylvania State Historical Records Advisory Board, so we're very glad to have him here today. After John Paul, we're going to hear from Beth Bisbano from the Pennsylvania State Library's Bureau of Library Development. She's currently the Library Development Advisor for Research and Statistics in the Department of Education, and she serves as the State Data Coordinator for Pennsylvania Libraries. And then after Beth, our third and final speaker today will be Jim Leonard, who is the Commissioner of the City of Philadelphia's Department of Records. Jim serves as the Recorder of Deeds for Philadelphia. He manages the city's records management program and administers the department's public access to records, including the City Archives and Records Center. So this is an amazing group, obviously. Each of our presenters has been involved in a major office and records and archives move, so they're going to be able to talk about their experiences with that. Like I mentioned, we're going to have a question and answer session at the end after all 3 of them have spoken. So if you have any questions, I'd ask that you hold them till the end, then we'll have about 10 minutes to answer all of those. So that's enough of me talking. I'm just going to hand it off to John Paul. Thanks.
Good morning. Thanks to Tyler for his introduction and to Josh and Cindy and David and the staff of the State Archives for this opportunity to expound on the joys and tribulations, challenges, and ecstatic satisfaction that accompanies the gratifying accomplishment of an archival shelving project. It is a privilege for me to be able to share with you a few brief insights, observations, tips, and perceptions gleaned from an initiative to improve archival storage in one of the oldest archival cultural collections in Western Pennsylvania. And a shout out to all the state archive staff online and to Ashley. The outline of this presentation, this is the button, right? This is what we should have practiced. There we go. The outline of this presentation will consist of an introduction and overview, move on to a brief description of collection scope and condition, review the facility layout, summarize project funding, planning, and implementation, and close with some thoughts on evaluation on long-term maintenance. The Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania was founded in Pittsburgh in 1879 and first stored its archival collections in what was then the new Allegheny County Courthouse. In 1891, it moved them to the newly built Carnegie Free Library in Oakland, and in 1914, it relocated to its own Bigelow Boulevard building, where we remained for the next 90 years. Here are pictures of the exterior of the reading room of that building, as well as the entrance to the current library and archives. In 1996, HSWP moved and opened the Senator John Heinz Pittsburgh Regional History Center in the former Chautauqua Lake Ice Company building at 1212 Smallman Street in Pittsburgh's Strip District. Here's a photograph of the current building. The project I'm going to describe today took place on the 5th floor of this building, roughly the half block front to back. I put the arrows up there. The storage area is behind 2 museum exhibition halls and directly beneath the library's patron access reference area on the 6th floor. Here's a floor plan of the project space. The holding area was the current Barentsfeld Gallery. The project consisted of moving records from what was known as the D-stacks to the holding area, renovating the D-stacks area, moving records from the holding area back to the D-stacks, moving records from the E-stacks into the holding area, renovating the E-stacks, and then moving records back to E-stacks. So there was a multi-phase project. The project went from May 2015 to October 2016. Stakeholders included, but were not limited to, our patrons, History Center staff and board, donors past and future, families and civics groups throughout Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania, and a worldwide online constituency of 500,000 visitors a year. Project planning comprised, but was not limited to, identifying resources, risks, and requirements, defining deliverables, and establishing communication and contingency plans, and recognizing a series of constraints that included a floor weight load study, architectural designs, environmental controls, permits and inspections, construction challenges, procurement obstacles, and quality control and evaluation. The overall budget for this project was $410,218, which does not, and I emphasize this, did not include staff time. The team included 14 professionals and volunteer team members, 5 different construction teams, architects, electricians, shelving installers, fencing installers, and the HHC facilities team. 4 contractor bid processes, and more than 10,000 cubic feet of records were involved in the move, which represents about a third of the collection, but we moved the records twice, and in some cases 3 times, so 20 to 25,000 cubic feet of records were actually moved during the course of the project. And our primary challenge throughout this entire thing was that we were open to the public for the full 16 months, and 100% of the collections needed to remain accessible to meet researcher requests. The right side of this slide shows the various professional organizations that have printed assistance or published referral links that can provide insight and case studies. Groups ranging from the American National Standards Institute to the Special Libraries Association and to the Association of Research Libraries have models that can be used and for project design and implementation. The first recommendation I'd like to make is this book by the Society of American Archivists, which was the source I used to draft narrative justifications and text for deliverables, specifications, contractor guidance, and procurement documents. It is titled Archival and Special Collections Facilities, Guidelines for Archivists, Librarians, Architects, and Engineers. It is indispensable for anyone as a starting point for determining your requirements. When last I checked, the latest edition was 2009. It cost $40, but will save you countless hours of research when it comes to lighting fixtures, shelf metal length, strength, construction oversight protocols, environmental systems, fire suppression, fire safety, fire protection, security, materials, finishes, and equipment. The project was paid for from three sources: the Allegheny Regional Asset District capital budget, the R.K. Mellon Foundation, and the Allegheny County Community Infrastructure and Tourism Fund. $284,000 was for the shelving itself, while approximately $126,000 was for the new subfloor, electrical work, lighting, windows, and related construction costs. Like all projects, this one had strengths and weaknesses. In addition to the basic objective of improving the physical storage space, it gave us an opportunity to improve security, provide room for collection growth, and increase staff workplace within the stack areas. While conducting the move, we were often required to make on-the-spot conservation assessments of materials that might not have been accessed for the last 20 years and take some remedial action, usually new housing and replacing labels. The project had a few design weaknesses in that it was simultaneously conducted with a previously funded NHPRC grant that continued unabated throughout the duration of the task, as did the daily work of donor and patron services. We kept the reference desk open throughout the project and often found ourselves unwrapping pallets of move-ready records in response to patron requests. The workspace needed to remain a fire safety escape route throughout the project, so there always had to be access and egress through that space. And now this slide is the most important slide of the entire presentation. It shows the professional individuals that were the primary reason this project was successful. The team involved in each step of the move consisted of folks from every level of the History Center: vice presidents, volunteers, contractors, and facility staff. I cannot emphasize enough that the challenges inherent in this project design could not have been overcome without the persistent dedication and strenuous hard work of these individuals who sustained a cheerful daily approach throughout the 16-month duration of the project. This is the team whose time was not part of the project design and without whom this project could not have reached its triumphant conclusion. So now here are 5 before photographs. Like many storage areas, the shelves were not designed to meet the needs of the individual collections. Oversized materials were stacked on top of each other. Lighting was insufficient in many rows, requiring the use of flashlights to retrieve objects. Materials from different collections in different formats were stored on a wide variety of shelves and cabinets cobbled together through the years and often reflecting the location where they were placed 20 years earlier. Oversized maps and blueprints extended over the edge of the shelves. A wide variety of box types, tubes, folders, wrappings, frames, and loose items were often stacked in locations that added to the challenge of finding and safely moving them from the shelves. Stacks of boxes often were found at the end of rows or on floors between rows. Materials on top shelves were unreachable by many shorter staff members, and related materials from the same collection, though labeled and cataloged, were stored in numerous locations throughout the room. Windows were darkened out with plastic trash bags, and file cabinets were placed throughout the stacks at random. Doors to the storage area were the same ones used by the ice house 100 years earlier. They were heavy and rusted and difficult to move by most of the staff. Tables used to stage processing projects remained throughout the shelves. Film was stacked along with rolled items wherever could fit. Where ladders existed, they couldn't be easily moved due to the records stacked on the floor around them. Fronts and backs of boxes shelved at various different times were facing in different directions. Overhead pipes and ventilation were often obstructed, or obstructing materials slid into place between related materials. In some areas, the boxes had been placed on pallets that were moved near other pallets, requiring staff to climb over them to get to materials in the back of the room. Over time, heavier boxes that had been placed on top of lighter boxes had begun to cave in and compress the bottom tier of boxes. Now here is a rendition of the agenda for the first project meeting held on May the 21st of 2015, just a few days after the project began. I was the project director and had commenced my responsibilities with the History Center just 4 weeks earlier. Note that it consists almost entirely of defining goals, defining team member roles, discussion of project plan development, and considerations for the ongoing projects like the NHPRC grant. On the other side of the page is one of the final planning documents drafted just a month before the conclusion of the initiative. Note that it consists almost entirely of specific tasks in sequential order that serve as a final lap checklist. My purpose for including this wide assortment of documents, which I don't intend for you to read, is to emphasize the role of communication. Memorandum, email, reports, agreements, meeting agendas, checklists, procurement documentation, etc., were all crucial component of ensuring that the team stayed on target and on time. These documents had numerous sources and often multiple versions. There was no central project repository, analog or digital, and so many solutions were developed on the fly as needed, such as the move tracking form seen here. These indispensable sheets of mimeographed magic recorded every box moved every day of the project by every staff member. Although the majority of the collections were accessioned, cataloged, and listed on our shelf lists, there simply wasn't enough time on a daily basis to change 2 or 3 electronic databases or system entries every time a box or set of boxes was moved. As the interim locations would inevitably change, again, as space requirements necessitated frequent shifting of the boxes to help them fit on the shelves. Each sheet served as a double check for quality control and listed the collection name, collection number, old location, new location, volume of records, preservation issues, if the material needed to be reboxed or relabeled, and a row for comments. If a reference staff couldn't find something for a patron during the course of the project, almost always it was something that had been moved recently and could be located by staff from these forms. Here is a slide of equipment used throughout the project, including interim lights to illuminate the holding area, an array of carts, processing tables, dust vacuums, pallets, a pallet jack, and a first aid kit which contained dust masks, bandages, box cutters, and an assortment of tools. During this project, we replaced all of our old wooden pallets with state-of-the-art, non-insect eatable, injection mold, heavy-duty, museum-quality plastic pallets. Here is the during shot that shows the room undergoing its environmental transformation. So those were the before shots. Now here's the during shots that show the room undergoing. The new flooring is being installed, electrical lighting is being added parallel to the rows, and the structural support columns around the shelving, around which the shelving will be built, are being measured and cleaned. Here's a during shot that shows the E-stacks in the interim storage location on the temporary pallets. Note that each set was shrink-wrapped and numbered, and that large flat items, boxes of newspapers, film canisters, map drawers, are labeled for easy reference. Here is the during shot that shows stacks of rolled blueprints and oversized materials moved to supplemental swing space to facilitate construction requirements. And here is a during shot that shows the installation of the empty shelves on top of the new tracked flooring, as well as the new energy-efficient lighting. All of the calculations on shelf size and spacing, as well as the collection location, shelf numbering, updating of shelf lists, location labeling, and collection spacing was conducted by all of the staff by hand. And here are samples of the worksheets we developed to show staff priorities on a daily and weekly basis, and to guide decisions about how much work was able to be accomplished according to the evolving timetable. In the absence of sophisticated design software, we employed PowerPoint to design the area in the back of the E-stacks, which was going to house our newspaper collection. The arrows denote the direction of the boxes are accessed, and the chart shows a series of box numbers intended for each location. Now here is the comparison of the before and after shots. This one shows the D-stacks from the shelving, with the shelving filled and the security fencing up, as this area was the fire exit area, the escape route to the back of the building that I referenced earlier. Here is the comparison before and after shots showing improved accessibility to photograph negatives. Note that they are not just physically accessible and better lit, but numerically arranged and in uniform boxes sized to fit the shelf. Here is the comparison before and after shots of the map case and oversized storage materials, with materials removed from shelving and placed in appropriate cabinets. Note that the cabinets are raised off the floor and placed on the new conservation appropriate pallets. Here is the comparison before and after shots of the newspaper area where formerly film was stored. Our long-range strategic plan includes cold storage for the film. It's worth noting that a significant number of southwestern Pennsylvania titles are not on newspapers.com or microfilmed by the Pennsylvania Newspaper Project, including many of the 20th century foreign language publications. We have a lot of unique materials here. I just want to put in a pitch that they need to be digitized. The plastic on the windows has been replaced by frame casings, and the rusted industrial doors have been replaced by security fencing that provides clear line of sight through the stack areas. Individual areas can be locked down for controlled access by archival, security, or maintenance staff. Following the completion of the project, we instituted a regular schedule of bi-monthly shelf audits for continually to improve quality control and ensure that all of the online catalogs and databases reflect where items are actually located. The goals are listed here and include conservation assessment of infrequently accessed materials, as well as connecting related materials and collections. So, by way of summary, here are some of the points that we are most proud of achieving. We maintained full reference access to the collection throughout the project with no disruption to patron services. There were no injuries. I emphasize, no injuries. I am so happy to be able to say that. And values of cooperation among team members was strengthened. Quality control and business processes were improved. Some of the things we could have done better: contractor management, scope creep, and project staff recognition. I simply cannot emphasize enough, this project was successful because of the hard work, persistence, and dedication of a team of standards-focused, responsible, conscientious, and energetic individuals who are a credit to the archival and librarian professions. I am humbled to count myself as a member of this team's fan club. So, what are my parting tidbits of savory advice? Give your team enough time. Don't set impossible deadlines. Take small bites. Sequentially space work and recovery times at frequent intervals. Perform shelf audits periodically throughout the projects. Don't wait until the project's completion. Keep team motivation at optimum levels. Document and maintain the integrity of the process at each phase. Don't let a staff meeting, a board meeting, a supervisor meeting go by without a progress or status report, and always keep the big picture in mind. Think frequently of the colleagues a generation or two from now who will appreciate present-day responsible stewardship. It has been a pleasure to be with you this morning. Continued thanks to PHMC for this opportunity, and best wishes to all managers of archival preservation projects. You are doing the work that ensures the Commonwealth will continue to thrive and improve and successfully protect the best interests of our fellow citizens. Planning for shelving projects is a requirement for all growing collections. As collections develop, so too do their managers. I wish you all the best, and thank you this morning for your attention.
Good morning. I want to thank Archives and Records for having me here today to tell our story. Make sure that I know how the clicker works here. Okay. To tell our story about our move. There we go. Whoops. My name is Beth, and I work for the Pennsylvania Department of Education in the what you would know as the State Library. Officially, it's called the Office of Commonwealth Libraries. There are two bureaus. The Bureau of the State Library, which is the actual books, digitized materials that you would think as a library. The Bureau of Library Development, however, is more of an administrative type unit or bureau within the big picture here. Our bureau, we have 10 staff in the bureau totally, and in my particular office, there is 4. And as you will see, my particular office has a lot of paper, has a lot of files, and has a lot of materials. Probably the bulk of what is in the Bureau itself. So the Bureau of Library Development oversees about 654 library outlets. That would be main libraries, bookmobiles, branches, 654. It's a lot. We have 2 major grant programs that we run, one federal, one state. We have state aid. We administer state aid that comes appropriated from the legislature. We need to have applications for that. We need to have plans for that. We need to have yearly reports for that money, and we also require audits. We have a 5-year on-site retention. So we have a lot of material that needs to stay with us. And it's not that it just sits there. We use it almost every day. We also have statistical and historical documentation that we use for reference purposes. And we have programming documentation and advisory files for all the libraries in Pennsylvania, which could include their bylaws, how they were established, agreements between the library and the municipality for service. So we do have a lot of documentation. Where did we come from? Well, we came from the Forum building, which is over here across the way. The library separated from the museum and moved into that building in 1931, as you can tell. And it was considered the Department of Public Instruction, which is now the Department of Education. And so we were alerted it's time to renovate. No kidding. So the question became, well, now what? What are we going to do? Because obviously it was going to be a big, big project. So we had some questions. And here are some of the questions and a lot of the initial answers. When are we moving? Well, that was kind of a moving target. Starting in the spring of 2018, that moving date changed 10 times. If anything you learn through what I have to tell you, you just have to be patient and persevere when you have to deal with a move. Where are we moving? Well, maybe to the Department of Education building, but we're not quite sure yet. What are we moving? Well, what do we need to move? Obviously, materials to do our job. What can we move? As little as possible. What can't we move? This was a killer. Furniture and filing cabinets. Because as you will see, we lived in filing cabinets, and we could not take our filing cabinets. And what type of storage will we have for our files? Don't know. Unknown. Possibly shelving units. So we decided, and this was the 4 staff members for the most part, and brought other people into it. We decided that we needed to have a plan. We didn't know what the plan was down the road here, but we needed to get a plan in order to get organized ourselves. So we came up with kind of like a 3-prong approach. First of all, we needed to do an assessment of what we had. And then we needed to know what type of resources did we need in order to execute the move. And then we also needed to have a timeline. And in the back of our minds, it was be prepared for anything, because we just didn't know what was going to come down the pike. So we developed the plan, and first off, the assessment. What do we have? What files need to be moved? What can be purged? What materials, and this was key and something to keep in mind, what materials will be needed for daily work up to the move date? It was very important because, obviously, our jobs were going to continue. So this is what we had. 24 5-drawer vertical filing cabinets, all hanging folders. The calculations, I got a measuring device and did calculations, and a file drawer is 33 inches long. So we ended up measuring all that, doing a little bit of math, and we ended up with 330 linear feet. That's 110 yards. That's the length of a football field. And that's one office in the Bureau. Obviously, we needed to downsize, and we did. And we downsized down to 151 linear feet. Still a lot. We purged. We threw a lot of stuff out. We sent things to the record center. Thank you very much. That helped us a whole lot. And again, like I said, 5 years of material on site we had to basically keep. And a lot of it is we actively look at. So also in the plan, what did we need in order to execute the move? Well, obviously, if we can't take our filing cabinets, we're going to have to rehouse the files. We're going to need boxes for the move. We're going to need tape, and I will emphasize this. Tape, good tape, not surplus, good tape. You're going to need stickers in order to label the boxes, and make sure that you actually have tape to identify the boxes. Different color tape for different locations wherever it is that you're going to go. And then trash and recycle barrels. This is very important. When they first told us that we were going to move, they said, oh, we'll put some trash barrels out there in the hallway by the elevators. There were 5. Okay, now keep in mind, I got 100 linear feet that I want to get rid of. It ended up that way. But the point being is 5 barrels was not going to cut it. In the high point of the move, when I was purging things, I was using about 5, maybe 6 barrels a day. And also it all needs to be coordinated so that the barrels get emptied. Because when you go in the next day, what are you going to do if you have full barrels? So there has to be an organized plan to all of this. And also what's important is to have space. You're not going to think about that, but when you start boxing things up, you need to have space to put it, or you're going to be tripping over them. And you're also going to have time. You're going to need to have time in order to do all of this. So I came up with a timeline. This was the timeline that we had. And I just got this off of the internet, Googled it, timeline template, just used it. And we basically divided it into 4 sections, which were for what the annual reports, when we were going to box those up, the advisory files, the background for the libraries, the historical materials, and then personal space materials. So we had to come up with some priorities, and these were the priorities. So of the total linear footage, we came up with 120 linear feet for everyday files. They had to be a priority. Then we had reference materials, historical records, and the personal office content. And personal office content includes current work that's on your desk and all the other stuff that you collect over time. At this point then, what we needed to do was to start thinking about what we were going to order, what resources we were going to order, and how do you go about ordering it. And what you have to keep in mind is, once you order something, you have no control over it. When it gets there, when you're going to have it, so you have to definitely do that in advance. So we came up with some calculations again. We decided that the main files from the filing cabinets had to go intact. And so therefore what we wanted to do was to take what was in the filing cabinet and put it directly into a box. And that box then would become drawer 1. drawer 2, drawer 3. All the way through, I think we had, in my particular area, we had probably 30 drawers. And then what we ended up doing was estimating in a 5-drawer filing cabinet, you're probably going to estimate you're going to need about 7 boxes. We ordered 100. That was the start. Then we had to think about new file folders, because we had the regular manila file folders that hung in the green hanging folders. That wasn't going to work if we were going to move to a system where we needed to just have shelving. So we had to rethink rehousing this. Fortunately, my dad was a CPA, and he used what were called Redwells. These are these expandable folders here. So you just put the manila folders in there. So we decided to get the 3.5 inch because we didn't want to carry 5 inches around. So we got 3.5 inch, so we had to calculate 3.5 inches. We did the math. We needed 440 of them. Then we had to order them. So once we got everything, this was the process. Stage 1. We debated exactly how we were going to do this, but it ended up in this way. First of all, what we're going to do is remove the documents for records retention. Let's get them out of here. Call Tyler, whoever, get them out of here. And then we had to move the hanging files to the expandable folders. So all those manila folders, we had to put them back in. We needed to rehouse them. Then we debated this. Do we really want to put them in boxes? Do we really want to live out of boxes until we find out we're going to actually move? We decided no. So we took the expandable folders and we put them back into the filing cabinet as a temporary thing. The most time was converting those into the Redwells, converting the files into the Redwells. That took the most time, but we figured it would be quicker just to take the Redwells and stick them into the long boxes. So this was our goal. Our goal was to have something organized as compared to something that's disorganized. On the left, you can see that we planned. On the right, you can see somebody didn't. So the process then, step 2 with these particular files, was that we moved the folders, the expandable folders, into the boxes, but we wanted to still keep the boxes accessible. So we did not tape these boxes down until the very last minute, basically, 2 days before we were actually going to move. I think they said we were going to move on Tuesday. We taped them down on Friday. And as you can see from the picture there, we don't have a whole lot of pictures because we didn't think anybody would really care, so we didn't take a whole lot of pictures, but we do have some. As you can see there, we didn't stack them, because if we needed to get into them, you're not going to move them, and we certainly weren't. So we had everything stacked. If we needed to, it was labeled, we could get to it. So then we had other materials, things like directories, library directories going back to 1961, statistical publications. We had summaries of state aid allocations, reference documents, and of course personal and current work. We decided that these type of materials were either going to go into copy paper boxes or archive boxes. Coming from that world, I wanted the historical documents in the archive boxes, and thus they are. And I think I ended up about 9 of them. But again, these are things that we really use for research on an everyday basis. So what we really did was we needed to organize, and we needed to find space, because the thing is, once you start putting things in boxes, you're building a fort. And we also wanted to make sure that we grouped things together, like things were together. The materials from the bookshelves, the foundational and historical documents, we put everything together. And we wanted to make sure that it was accessible. but we labeled everything. We knew where everything was. So here's some tips on that. Have an accessible staging area. Don't pile the boxes up so you can't get to them. Label things on 3 sides, because once you get to the new location, if it's not labeled on 3 sides, you're not going to know where anything is if you have things in sequential order. And keep in mind, our files are in county order, so therefore we had to put them back in county order and in the order that they came out of the drawer. So we had all the boxes numbered. Color code for multiple locations. If it's going to go to one location, color code it purple. If it's going to go to another cubicle or whatever, color it orange. But in order to be organized, we knew where things needed to go. And again, tape, and tape, because guerrillas move this stuff and you just have no idea what they're going to do with it. And here's another thing. One thing that I really didn't think about. What you need to do is plan what's going to happen when you get to the new location, where the stuff is going to go. So in the final analysis, the cleaning out and packing up took 5 weeks. The unpacking took 2 weeks. It definitely was difficult to keep up with daily work. We needed to prioritize and to multitask. It was exhausting and dirty. We had records going back. I was inhaling dust from 1960s. It was pretty messy. I went home. I was filthy on some days. And paper cuts. You don't know until you go home to wash your hands or whatever how many paper cuts you actually get. Have Band-Aids, I looked like I went through a war. You will get paper cuts. There is no doubt about that. So here's another tip. Before it's too late, don't let your office get out of control. Don't let your cubicle get out of control. Purge and scan things. Don't use paper clips. Don't use paper clips, because when you have to start throwing files out, you have to take those paper clips off. And they're not the easiest things to remove. I just threw them on the floor. I figured somebody would get them. When someone retires, do an immediate assessment. Get rid of their stuff. Do not keep it. We had files for people who retired 17 years prior to the move. And understand and utilize records retention. And here's this. There is an end to the there is light at the end of the tunnel. It will come to an end. You will move, and it'll be good. But be aware of unrealistic expectations. You cannot do it all in a week. You cannot do it all in 2 weeks. We were lucky we got it done in 5 weeks. And after all that, take a vacation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Leonard. I oversee the Philadelphia City Archives and a number of other different functions in what's known as the city's records department. Some of you may know where you are, and Tyler did a good job in sort of giving a brief summary of that. So thank you to Tyler, Cindy, and to Joshua for having me here today. I'm excited to tell you all about our move of our city archives. We could just go over here briefly a short outline of what I'm going to talk about. I want to just give you a little bit of a flavor of who we are, what our collection's like, then an overview of the relocation itself, the overall goals that we were attempting to achieve in the relocation, other than just we have to move. Then I want to go through a series of lessons learned in the different stages of the move, and you can see there's several, and as John Paul and Beth said, you know, we all sort of went through this in different at different levels, all these stages to get through this process. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of the highlights of our new location at the City Archives, and then tell you a little bit about what's next for us over the course of the next year as we see it. So who are we? We are the permanent records of historical and cultural significance for the city of Philadelphia. The collection is over 300 years old. We have property records going back to the 1680s. We have the original, for example, city charter of William Penn from 1701 with his original signature and seal. Our first volume of our local city council's minutes from 1704, and really the list goes on from there. We have about 2,000 to 3,000 visitors per year. And if I could, I'll just go over briefly for all of you, because I think you'll appreciate it, just an overview of what the massiveness of the collection is. We're one of the largest municipal archives in the country and one of the oldest. We have 16,000 boxes, mostly those comprise of our genealogical records going back into the 18th century. We have about close to 40,000 bound volumes, which I'll tell you a little story about in the move in a few minutes. About 3,500 rolled plans, 650 drawers of flat files, a 2 million photograph collection, and a small collection of about 400 films. So this is a lot of stuff. And when they first brought me in, I'm a lawyer by training, so the first day when I first started, I went to the facility, which also houses our record storage center that we're responsible for, and they brought me in and they said, "Jim, this is what we have to move." And there was a loud thud, which was me falling on the floor, because this was massive, and there was no plan at that point. It was just, we have to move, and we actually leased the facility, and we were required to be out by a date certain at the end of the lease. We were in the pathway of our landlord, Drexel University's major expansion near 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, so we had no choice. Let me give a brief overview of the relocation. As I said, our previous home for 20 years was in the Drexel University area near the 30th Street train station in Philly. We relocated to our new home at 6th and Spring Garden Street, which is in the Northern Liberty section of the Philadelphia, still centrally located about 2.5 miles away. We moved from a 79,000 square foot facility into a 65,000 square foot facility, which not only includes our city archives, but also our record storage center, which is made up of, right now, about 136,000 boxes of business records from city departments. And we also share space, and they also relocated our register of wills, archival will material. The timeline for the whole project, it took us about 2 years from start to finish, from design through the relocation and then opening to the public. We really began planning and design in December of 2016, and we reopened to the public in September 2000, opened to the public in September of 2018. We had a grand opening a few months later at the end of the calendar year. Total cost was, for this whole facility, so all the functions, not just city archives, although the city archives cost was disproportionately weighted to the city archives because of the needs, was $10 million all in from beginning to end, and that was funded by the City of Philadelphia's capital budget process, which actually starts years in advance, and I'll give you a flavor of what it's like to set a budget years in advance and then actually try and do one of these moves, including not having found a site yet. The budget goes up, and there's a lot of conversations about why. And we didn't do this, as Beth and John Paul said, you do not do this alone, and we especially did. And there were over a dozen city agencies that supported our department, the Department of Records, in planning for and executing and building out the new facility. So what were our overall goals? There were really two. We wanted a modern, accessible, state-of-the-art facility. Our previous facility looked a lot like some of the photos you saw from John Paul. I didn't bring photos. I didn't have to. Ours looked a lot the same. records stacked everywhere in sort of not ideal ways. And so we wanted to change all that and also be, as I said, centrally located like our previous facility, because we're, like all of you, publicly accessible. We're open to the public. So there was talk, as Beth said, we had a lot of conversations in our offices in the city too about where will we move? And some folks in the city wanted us to move down by the airport. Well, we didn't want to do that because the public can't really get there as easily. So in the end, we found a really good spot. We're centrally located still in Center City. We're just north of it and near accessible transportation. And then the second thing, and this is really important, is we wanted to use the move itself as an opportunity to expand our outreach and accessibility and engagement with the community. So like all of you, I'm sure, we have a dedicated, very dedicated customer base traditionally of researchers, genealogists, university professors, et cetera, students. But most people in Philadelphia don't know who we are, and we thought we had a lot more to offer. So when we moved, we took a number of steps I'll touch on to try and expand that community engagement. So I want to go into now in the different phases of the move and the whole project. I want to talk a little bit about the lessons we learned at each stage. And there were hundreds, and I'm only here for a few minutes, so I've picked a couple of the major ones that I thought would resonate with everybody, excuse me. So let's talk about design. Our design process took about 5 months to complete. We worked obviously with an outside architectural firm, and our landlord, we also rented our new space, so our landlord. My biggest lesson was count your collection early and accurately, because what I discovered was the city had done previous to my taking the position, had done a feasibility study and done a collection count. So I had that copy of that, and I sent it when we were ready to start planning. I shared it with our lead archivist, who I had assumed had seen it wrong. And she called me up a few hours later in really a state of panic and said, this count is way, way low. They missed a room when they counted, a big room. The room where the close to 30, almost 40,000 volumes of property or deed books and court records were. And at this point, we had rented the space. So how do you make it fit? And I'll tell you a little bit about what we did in a moment. And then the other thing we took advantage of is we had a blank canvas. So we were starting in a whole new facility with a sort of vanilla envelope, which is what we did not have before in our previous facility. So we took that, and I would recommend anybody who has that opportunity to take advantage of it and really think about what you want the public, all the sort of features, whether it's for your staff or for the public, that you want them to have, or your staff, and then to offer to the public to take full advantage of the collection in a way that they hadn't before. And our previous facility was sort of as I think I agree with John Paul, ours was sort of a lot of ad hoc sort of add-on over the years. Things sort of, were done to sort of make it work. And as I said, we took advantage of this new opportunity to change that. Last thing, at least in an organization our size, I found, is the city has a central IT department, which serves every city department. So we're just like a little tiny, blip on, not a blip, but a little tiny, element of what they do. And and IT was a critical part of standing up a new facility like this. And I didn't know anything about IT. So, but what we discovered was that, and it was a sort of long road to get to it, is there really wasn't a central project manager on the IT side from our IT department and the city's IT department assigned. So it was very piecemeal. And ultimately it was a great job by everybody. But I think we all suffered a little bit from not having, we had a project manager for the construction, the fit out, the move, but I think there wasn't as much thought, in all fairness, there was a lot to think about, but to having a real project manager just for the IT. Because I thought of IT as just this sort of monolithic thing, and of course, that's naive, I learned. So again, I would sort of recommend that you give thought to the IT nature of the project, because we got just very focused on the move itself, as it's not surprising. So let's talk a little bit about our construction. That was 8 months to fit out the whole facility. Lessons learned there was I would say our fire suppression system. So throughout probably close to a year, and even before during the design, there was very intense, and for good reasons, obviously, conversations with, and they went on for the whole construction period, with the city's risk management department, the city's casualty insurer, FM Global, the landlord, their general contractor, their architect, their sprinkler subcontractor, and our Department of Licenses and Inspections, who at different points was not satisfied with the design. We discovered despite having granted the permits, but were not satisfied at different points with the as-built. And we had to sort of do additional work to satisfy them to get it right, and to satisfy the insurer, whose underwriters have higher standards than the building code. And we were building to the underwriter standards. So there was a lot of iterative back and forth, including our licensing and inspections department shutting us down for the construction down for close to a month. That's a problem. That blows your timeline right off the wall when you're already, frankly, behind, realistically, because all this stuff takes a lot longer than you sort of spec out in the beginning. And I think to echo the previous speakers too, what we learned is you really have to be flexible and creative to make adjustments on the fly. I always described it as, so like I said, we planned this years in advance, and once you find the facility, all of a sudden a lot of things start to change, the costs change, and just one example with this bad count we were stuck with is we couldn't fit all of the volumes that we had not included in the count. So we were lucky enough that the ceiling height in the facility is 23 feet high. So we went vertical with in the archive, 76 rows of high-density mobile shelving, which were originally designed to be 7 feet high and are now 13 and a half feet high. And we use ladders. And then, so when we went up, then the structural engineer for the landlord said, well, wait a second. We don't know if the slab can even hold this. It's over 1 million pounds and about 4,000 square feet of weight from this now, because you've doubled the height. So that was a harrowing month that we had to wait for the structural engineer, who ultimately it came back and it was fine and it worked. But we didn't have a good solution if it didn't work. And so I would just say you just really have to be flexible and creative. And we moved to using higher ladders basically, and trained the staff in safety in a way that we wouldn't maybe have had to otherwise. So let's talk about the move itself and lessons learned. Actually, I might have skipped one. Can I go back? Construction. Preparing the collection, I'm sorry. So preparing the collection, as others have said, start early. We started about a year before. That's actually when I got involved in it. I found out that our archivists were already starting to prepare and think about this even many months before, a year in advance, thankfully. And that really goes to my second point, and to others who already spoke, which is rely on your experts. And that, for us, is a very small archival staff. It's only 4 people. But they're wonderful. They know the collection better than anybody and its needs, obviously. And then we were really lucky to have just a tremendous group of consultants and support to help us figure out a lot of the issues. And we sort of developed a plan, as I think Beth said early on, of sort of how to prioritize what we were doing. And for us, it was, what needed the most attention and preparation to actually execute the move in a safe way for the records to rehome them. So my example is we had a group of 1,700 tax assessor volumes that went floor to ceiling 13 feet high, and they were in severe state of red rot deterioration. And the first time the staff showed them to me, and I just thought, this is a small piece of the collection, but it just looked overwhelming. What to do with it. So luckily, we did an assessment. We got an outside consultant at the Conservation Center in Philadelphia, who we work with frequently. And they would come in, they would wear, they came in, they had to vacuum every single one our staff would stage them, and when they did, they would wear, the big white suits and masks and gloves, and we had to have the landlord turn off the sprinkler system every time we were going to do this, because otherwise we would have set off a sprinkler system in a building that's occupied by Drexel students and the University of Pennsylvania Medicine and all sorts of folks who wouldn't have been happy with us. So it took a lot of coordination. That was very successful. They were all vacuumed, wrapped, tied, cataloged in a way they weren't ever before. Now we could move them, and they can actually be used now by the public in a way that they couldn't before. And just another example, we have a big glass plate negative collection in our photograph collection, and that took a lot of preparation to individually bubble wrap, essentially, and box all of those. And they also have heat. We learned from our archivists, they're sensitive to heat, so they will combust if they reach a certain temperature. So that had to be taken into account in the move. So just then a little bit about the move itself. That took 8 months to complete the overall, the archives move itself. I would encourage you to think about others, think about your closure period. We had to close. There was no way that we could have remained open to the public given the scope of what we had to do. But we thought very carefully about it. We actually did close for 8 months with the exception of a few critical areas that remained accessible. So we did an assessment, and for us, the ability to access property records, archival property records for not just historical research, but for day-to-day real estate transactions in the city. And I also, as Tyler said, serve as the recorder of deeds. So we deal with all the title companies and all the sort of associated folks in the industry. So that had to remain available throughout the entire move. So essentially what we did was we moved all of the deed books and the deed microfilm last to shorten the time that it was basically out of commission. And then that was successful. And then we also remained sort of available to city departments and offices who also, from time to time, not as frequently, but need archival research. And my one lesson with this is overall is this is going to take longer than you think. It took us a lot longer. It was the move itself, the cost of movers, which ended up being for us about $1.1 million. And at any given time, we would have about over 30 movers working in tandem at the two different facilities, old and new, on a daily basis for about 8 months. You get to know them really well. They are a lot of big guys, as Beth said, but they did a great job, and a good moving company that you have a good partnership with is really critical, we found. And then last few points is we developed, and this is super important, as you heard from others, a chain of custody plan that our archivist developed and worked out very carefully with the movers. So we would have our archivist, our lead archivist at the old site, who would release records to the movers, who then would deliver it to the other site, and we had our other archivist at the other site who was checking everything in and then making sure everything was going onto the high-density mobile shelving and exactly where it had been mapped out. And that goes to my last point, which is we took the opportunity, I think as John Paul said, some of our records were sort of not ideally placed, and I mentioned that before, in the old facility, and sort of ad hoc over time they had developed like that. And here we wanted to rethink all that, and so what we did was when we rehomed everything, we worked actually with a gentleman who we're really lucky to have him, who had been a logistics guy at not Boeing. Anyway, a major company like Boeing, or Lockheed Martin, I'm sorry. And he measured every shelf that we sort of recreated, and the shelving heights and where everything was going to be placed was all mapped to maximize every single one, to maximize the space potential, to address any special needs of the materials that were being placed on the shelves. So as opposed to our old facility where you might have volumes stacked this high with this much shelving height above it wasted, we took a lot of pains to sort of rethink that at the new facility in a way I think that maybe hadn't been done for quite some time. So what are some of the highlights? And this really goes to, at the new facility, what we were trying to do in terms of greater engagement. We have a new piece of public art, which is a 75-foot mural that uses an original redlining map that we have at the city archives and delves into history of the city's involvement in the abolition movement and the housing discrimination, fight against housing discrimination in the 20th century. And that's supported by a brand new free app that is available for download by the public, which has a tremendous amount of content on it that we're very proud of. And we worked with our Philadelphia School District to develop that content too in an effort to sort of do more outreach. We have a new modern public research room, which is the second photo. Next you can see this is our stacks and the mobile shelving. That's one of the rows of the 76. You can see it's very neat and orderly, which we like, and clean. And then finally, we developed a new dedicated public meeting space. So we now host events. We host groups who want to come in and visit. And that's something we didn't have at the other facility. And then just a few things. We did a lot of sort of sustainable elements in the design too. We worked with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability to do all LED lighting with sensors. We have a new building automation system that's much more efficient, and all brand new dehumidification equipment for the archives collection. So what's next for us? The big thing coming up for us we're excited about is I hope by the end of the calendar year issue an RFP to digitize all of our genealogical records, which could be up to about 10 million records. This is an acronym of a conversation, a meeting I had with Beth with Cindy and Tyler several months ago when they came to visit. And other things we're doing is we now put on regular exhibits. So we started last February. We have museum cases, display cases. We have put on exhibits for Black History Month, Women's History Month, Fair Housing Month, the 4th of July, and now we have an exhibit up till the end of the year on the neighborhood where we live, which is Northern Liberties. And then along the way, to expand further, we just started a panel series. Our first one was last month. It was on fair housing. It was attended by about 70 people, and we did Facebook live streaming too. So for us, that was a great success. It was attended by members of the public and then other folks sort of interested in archival things, fair housing advocates. Our Mayor Kenny came and said some nice words. So it's a way, and we're looking forward to sort of our next one, which is going to be in the spring, but another way to expand our sort of profile and use the new space to do that. And then we're going to continue to try and sort of be creative in expanding those partnerships. Thank you.
So certainly picking up the common thread of patience and perseverance, especially as we look at delayed timelines and schedules and things like that. I'd like to ask the other speakers to come up, and we'll go ahead and field questions as best as we're able. There are overhead mics, so if you have a question in-house, please just speak loudly and enunciate well. And I'll try not to let Beth's comment about purging your office make me sweat too much while I'm up here. So. With that, I'll turn it back over to the speakers. Thank you.
Questions? Any questions at all? Tyler.
We have a couple from online that
Sure.
have been coming in as y'all have been talking. Let me start. Our first one I'll start with is from Susanna Caleb, who said, I'll just read what she wrote. I have a general question for everyone about budgeting and making moves possible. If each speaker has come across unforeseen costs or the fact that deadlines sometimes aren't met on time and how that affects costs, and at some point does the money run out, do you have to change your plans based on that, or are you uncomfortable having conversations with people who fund these projects about needing more money? So a lot of ideas there if anybody wants to jump on that.
I didn't have that issue. I work for state government. I don't see the bill.
I touched a little bit on it. One of the biggest things that happened with us was because the city budgeted this in its capital budget project a few years in advance before the site was picked. When we were into the site and doing the design for the archival collection area, It turned out that in order to put the dehumidification equipment that we needed, one, it was way more expensive than it had been estimated a few years before. And two, it turned out that in this facility, the roof was going to have to be the portion of the roof over the collection was going to have to be taken off by the landlord and re-insulated in a way that could support the dehumidification equipment to work properly. That raised the bill by about $1 million. So yeah, that was like an uncomfortable conversation when I had to go to I had a lot of support on it, but when you have to go to the city's budget office, they don't understand. I mean, their question is, what happened? Why is it $1 million over budget? So there was very good explanations, and we were lucky enough that, at the end of the day, we didn't have an option but to move, so it actually had to be done. So we were lucky enough that they did find the money, but things like that are going to happen.
I'm envious of my two colleagues who both work for governmental agencies. We're a nonprofit. We had a limited budget. That was the budget. There was no additional pot of money to go back to. So what happened was in the original plan, there were things built in, like hiring movers. And if we found ourselves running late, we just adjusted and said, okay, we're not going to hire movers, we're going to move it ourselves. And so those kind of adjustments were made within the confines. There wasn't any additional pot that we could go back to. It was all limited. So we had 3 funding sources.
John Paul, can I ask you
David,
a
yes.
question as well? I guess I'm probably one of the few people that knows what the conditions were at the History Center, having worked there for many years before moving to the university. But one of the things that is, I think, a difficult question sometimes for your institution, which is very focused on a lot of other activities, not just the library and archives. How did you advocate for the ability to be able to get compact shelving and renovations of that floor when there's a lot of competing voices
Right.
in an institution, a private institution like yours?
Right. Because we're an older cultural institution and because the mission has evolved over 140 years, there's always a need to be a strong advocate with competing departments who have other priorities. I'm being as diplomatic as possible. And sometimes one needs to assert that the priorities of collections development, collections management, stewardship, custodianship are the principles upon which any reputable organization that has integrity will build. And so a lot of times it's a matter of saying this is ephemeral and short term, and this is permanent and sustainable and needs to be prioritized. And was it easy? No. But sometimes reason wins out. Sometimes reason wins out. And a lot of this, by the way, I have to give credit to the management team that was there prior to me. So people like Betty and folks who had been working, had really established this project long before I walked in the door. Like I say, I started 4 weeks before the project started. So I inherited a framework and then worked within that framework. There was no choice. Ma'am.
This is for you and also Jim to a lesser extent. You had mentioned conservation assessments happening at the time of the move.
Right.
Did you do that through like the move tracking form, or did you have like a separate database where you
No,
tracked?
it was the move tracking form. It was all done manually on paper. Because it wasn't until you actually moved collections that you can say, oh my God, this needs a new box. Oh my God, this needs a new label. Oh, there's other things in here that we didn't know were in here. We'd move a box and we'd hear it jiggling and say, oh, there's film canisters inside this box. Let's mark that on the form. And so the conservation assessment literally took place every time we moved a box. And by the way this happened was the person who was moving the box had a recorder with them, so that there was always a team of 2. One person was physically doing the movement, and they'd rotate back and forth, so the other person could write on the sheet. So it didn't take that long really, because the collections were fairly well organized. It's just that they were all over the place. But everything had a number, everything had an accession number, everything had a collection number. It was just a matter of tying the pieces. It was like playing Tetris with 6 people simultaneously. And so instead of you saying, here's how the boxes will fit in ever-changing shelves, it's 6 people doing it at the same time. And it worked. It worked. But it's only because it was a good team that was able to do that. I mean, a lot of credit goes to our chief archivist, our chief librarian, the appraisal archivist, and the accessioning archivist, and our education coordinator archivist. They were amazing through the entire process. Tyler?
Jim, did you want to answer that one at all?
Yeah, I would just add that for us, we did the assessment in advance just because of the size of the collection. And we were lucky enough to have our chief archivist, who had been now retired, but been with us for over 20 years, who really had given a lot of thought, even before I had started, for months about what the needs were of different, parts of the collection, and had already started sort of reboxing things, for example, or buying new, containers for rolled plans and things like that, and starting to transfer them. And we tracked that with spreadsheets all the way through. And then we went, as I gave an example, if we went out for outside help where, it was outside of our area of expertise.
We have another question from online from Allison Hastings, and she writes, how did you communicate to the general public and your stakeholders and other people you work with and your members that you would be closed or going while this transition was happening, and how did this affect responses to requests for records?
Okay. Well, again, we're working with two different bureaus here. One is doing the administrative and also the state library. It actually went out on what we have listservs that each director, district administrators and such are on those listservs, and so those announcements would go out to the general public. I also think that through Pennsylvania Department of Education, they put out, particularly for the state library itself, they put out news alerts. But for the most part, our work continued. At Bureau of Library Development, we did not really shut down. We might have been a little bit slow, but we did not shut down. The state library, which is a whole other ball of wax as to what needed to be moved there, they did shut down for a period of time, and they are reopened now as an annex over in the Keystone building. But as far as library development went, and my office went, we still had deadlines to meet. We still had to answer questions, prioritizing, multitasking, doing emails in the morning, doing emails before you went home. We just had to juggle it all, and we stayed in business.
We didn't close. So.
As I mentioned, we did, and we, similar to Beth, we pushed out communications out through listservs and email lists and through groups, partner groups that we have to spread the word to most of the users that, the base of users that use the old facility. And then we had to do a little bit of more hands-on communication with some, and we put out notice on the website and things like that. But some more hands-on communication with some groups. Like we had, for example, a graduate course at Penn that comes in and uses our property records every fall several times for a research project, and we couldn't have them. And so that was not the easiest conversation to have. They were very disappointed. We tried to figure out a workaround or some alternatives. It didn't work for them. And so they weren't there for a year, but I'm glad to say that they just came back actually this fall to do the course. So there was a combination, mostly sort of broad communications, but then sometimes some more personal hand-holding with some of the users.
All right, thank you everybody for your questions, and thank you to John, Paul, Beth, and to Jim. If there were any questions that went unanswered, please feel free to reach out to Tyler through email, or if you're on site, if you want to speak with the presenters during the break. We're going to come back together. We're here in the room at 10:45 to start promptly. If Catherine Antonelli is here, if you could come see me during the break. Thank you.